Families Across Borders is a charity based in London. We specialise in international social work cases that involve the UK and at least one other country, and involves children and families separated across borders. We are staffed by social workers and caseworkers. We all have a lot of experience and specialist knowledge on working on cross-border cases. We are the UK representative of the International Social Service Network, and this means that we've got partner agencies in 130 countries worldwide, and we can work with these partners to deliver cross-border casework services. I have here some information on the cross-border case services that we offer at CFAB. So firstly, we run a free national advice line service to provide advice to professionals or members of the public on cross-border cases, and this operates from Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. each day. In terms of the specific case services we offer, we can pass on child protection alerts to other countries. We can also seek social service record checks, arrange welfare visits, and provide post-placement support services. This might be post-placement visits, for example. However, the bulk of our work really involves arranging assessments abroad to inform care proceedings in the UK. And that is the process I'd like to talk to you about today. So why is it important to understand how to arrange assessments abroad? Well, ONS figures, they show us that 40.4% of babies born in England and 19.4% born in Wales have at least one parent born outside the UK, with the most common countries being number one for both mothers and fathers, number one being India, followed by Pakistan, and then in third place is Nigeria. So these statistics really highlight the diversity of our population, the likelihood that really many of the families we work with as social workers will have international connections, and this really often includes relatives who live abroad and who may be able to care for a child when it's not possible for them to remain with their caregiver in the UK. So we need to know then how to arrange assessments of family members abroad. There are also additional reasons why family overseas may need to be explored as a potential placement option, and this comes from the guidance in terms of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and there's several key articles particularly relevant. I would say Article 3, 8 and 20 that emphasises it's a child's right to have their best interest taken into account, their identity should be preserved, and they should be provided with appropriate alternative care. And the statutory kinship care guidance for local authorities specifically states that the principle that children are raised by their families with their family networks or in family environment wherever possible, and that this principle applies to any work that we do as social workers of children and families. And I know for us social workers, these principles, they sound familiar. The key point here is that these responsibilities extend across borders when children have family overseas. There are clear benefits to exploring assessment of family members overseas. An assessment obviously gives the child a chance and the opportunity to remain within their family network, maintaining important connections and a sense of belonging. relatives and family members are also really can be highly motivated and emotionally invested in providing this stable long-term care and home, and this stability can help a child feel safe and secure, can support their well-being, their physical health, strengthen a sense of identity, and really would say encourage them to reach their potential. But of course, the benefits of any family placement depend on the quality of the placement, the child's needs and wishes, and whether a thorough assessment has been completed that considers the child's interests. So this really brings us to the question, how do we obtain a legally compliant, a culturally informed assessment of prospective caregivers when they're located abroad? So the key agencies involved in this process, that we've listed them here with a breakdown of who does what. So just starting with CFAB, of course. As I've already mentioned, we're the UK representative of the Social Service Network, and we work on a voluntary basis with partners in 130 countries. So this means we do not send social workers overseas, but we use locally based social workers located in our partner agencies to complete kinship assessments to inform court proceedings in the UK. Obtaining assessments from overseas is also within the scope of the 1996 Hague Convention. And contracting states to this convention designate what's called a central authority, who can cooperate with other central authorities in other relevant signatory countries to provide services such as arranging assessments. And you can find more information on the 1996 Hague Convention in our fact sheets that are on our website. I think what is important to say is that assessments completed under the 1996 Hague Convention are generally completed by statutory agencies for children's services in the placement country, and they will often not contain the level of detail that might be expected and required of an assessment completed by a UK social worker. You may also have the option of liaising with the embassy of the country where the child may be placed. In general, embassies can provide generic information on laws and procedures of their country. They often assist and support their citizens, and some may assist with arranging assessments of prospective carers. If you're working with a British family in the potential placement country, the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office through the local British Embassy may be able to assist depending on the circumstances and the context of the country. I do now want to focus a bit more closely on how CFAB may be able to assist with the process of seeking an assessment from abroad. As mentioned, CFAB can ask our international social service partners overseas to complete assessments in country where they're based. In some countries, our partners are charities, are a charity like we are at CFAB, or they might be a statutory agency. We also work with a number of independent social workers worldwide, some of whom have previous experience of working in the UK. So all our assessments are completed by social workers in country, and they will be culturally informed. This means the carers can be assessed in their language and in their community. We also quality assure assessments, reports wherever possible, wherever we can. And this means we can provide social workers overseas with support and feedback around the content, the evidence, the analysis, and really give them some support around what the court in the UK expects from their assessments. So, just to say, the assessments we receive, they will vary greatly. Some may be 40 pages long, plus, appendices. Others will be shorter, but we are really transparent around what you can expect from us from the outset. And that's really based on our previous experience of working with that country or with that specific social worker, independent social abroad, just so you can plan ahead. As a final point, we are a small charity, so we do need to charge a fee for our services, and that includes charging a fee for our assessment services. Beyond using CFAB, the Central Authority or embassies, there are other ways to obtain assessments. One option is direct liaison with the relevant statutory agency overseas, which may agree to complete the assessment on the request of a UK local authority or court. It is also possible for UK social workers to travel overseas to conduct assessments. It does still happen. We really understand why it does, because of the real challenges of arranging these cross-border assessments. But there are a number of issues to consider. One being, the main one is around the legality of a UK social worker practicing in another country. And here I take the example of South Africa. We know from our statutory partner there that it is illegal for a foreign social worker to practice in South Africa unless they're licensed, and they need to be regulated by the relevant professional body there. And it is in fact a criminal offence in that country. There are also issues around the ethics and risks of a UK social worker practicing overseas, as well as really the importance of having that cultural and context and cultural knowledge to be able to apply to the assessment. Another option is for the potential carer to travel to the UK. This allows for observation of the carer and child together, but the environment will obviously differ from the actual placement, and visas can be difficult to obtain in some cases for prospective carer to actually enter the UK. So if this has been considered, really early planning is really key. We have also seen remote assessments being used, especially post-COVID, but they do not capture the context fully and should not be relied on in isolation. Rather than relying on a single professional, it can be valuable to involve multiple professionals to ensure legal compliance, cultural understanding, and to gain a robust assessment. And there are three main ways that this can be done. The first is potentially a split assessment where the local social worker in the placement country is doing part of that assessment. For example, they may be looking at the suitability for the home, family practices, local resources, and carrying out local checks, while the UK social worker is then doing the rest, either virtually or inviting the prospective carer to the UK. The second option is a joint assessment, where the UK and the UK social worker and a local social worker complete the assessment together. This can be logistically really challenging to arrange, and it still requires that the UK social worker is legally able to practice in the placement country. The third option is what we call a complementary assessment. We are seeing this used much more frequently, and here two assessments are carried out simultaneously. So perhaps a local statutory social worker is completing assessment, and that's being requested by the Central Authority, and that's being done to meet the overseas authority's requirement for placement. While an independent assessment, for example, commissioned via CFAB, provides the detailed information needed to inform domestic proceedings in the UK. Yeah, so like I said, this is a much more common approach that we are now seeing. And the point of using multiple assessments or multiple professionals is echoed by Recorder Samuels, sitting as a Deputy High Court Judge. He pointed out in the case of REKTNU that it may be necessary to use multiple methods to obtain a comprehensive kinship assessment abroad. And I agree with this approach, and it's definitely something that we advocate for at CFAB. So I would like to talk you through now just some key considerations when arranging a kinship assessment from abroad, particularly when you're using a locally based social worker in country. Firstly, before you commission an assessment, you need to consider a child's right to reside in the placement country, or whether that right can be secured. So, for example, if we are placing a British child with a family member in France, we really need to be certain that child can legally reside in France on a permanent basis based on their nationality and immigration status. We also need to understand the nationality and immigration status of the prospective carer. This is important because you need to be certain that the carer themselves have secured the legal right to remain in the placement country and can permanently care for the child based on their own nationality and immigration status. The child and the prospective carer's nationality and immigration status can also determine the type of assessment required, such as whether it is a kinship assessment or an adoption assessment. And I say this because if there's no way for a child to legally remain in the placement country under a kinship arrangement because the child's nationality and immigration status will not allow for this, then the local authority may need to really consider the option of an adoption order, as this might be the only route to secure the child's legal right to remain with that prospective carer in the placement country. Another important consideration is the need for early consultation with the overseas authorities, the relevant overseas authorities, and this can assist with information sharing between countries, and it can also assist with ensuring joint planning for arranging assessments and placements. CFAB is able to assist with this type of early consultation, as can the Central Authority for the 1996 Hague Convention. So this convention, the 1996 Hague Convention, is an important legal instrument to be aware of. If a country is a contracting state to the convention, which the UK is, then you should contact the relevant central authority for the convention in your devolved nation to establish whether consent is required for the placement under Article 33 of the Convention, Article 33 of the 1996 Hague Convention. The central authority may advise that the overseas authority may need to undertake their own assessment for the purpose of this article, for the purpose of Article 33 consent. And if that consent, if Article 33 consent is not sought, then it may mean that the order that is made in the UK is not recognised and cannot be enforced in the placement country. And it may also mean that the prospective carer may not be able to access education, health, and other support services for the child. So it's really important to clarify early on the requirements for placement. The third consideration I've listed here is CFAB always recommends in the first instance that an initial screening completed via virtual means where possible and where appropriate. And this is just to avoid delay. This will really help determine from the outset whether or not the prospective carer wants to care for the child, but also really helps with collecting some vital and basic and vital information before making that request for a full kinship assessment in another country. It's also important that the prospective carers are informed by the UK social worker that they will be contacted by a local social worker who will conduct the full kinship assessment, and the prospective carers consent to engaging in that assessment. This is really important because some countries do not have established social services at a local level. Family members will not be familiar with the role of a social worker and may be distrusting of a local professional contacting them to complete the assessment if they're not informed in advance by the social worker in the UK of the request. We would also encourage you to be conscious of issues around communication. Communication can present as a challenge in arranging these cross-border assessments. Many of our partners do not speak English as their first language. Sometimes referrals need to be translated, and we also, need to be careful with acronyms that might not be familiar to social workers outside the UK. In addition, assessments themselves may need to be conducted in the social worker's first language and then written or translated into English. So this can cause delays, and even when translations are done, some concepts, some social concepts don't always come across clearly, and this can really lead to misunderstanding. So to help with this, CFAB has a quality assurance process in place to help our social workers ensure that these assessments are as clear as possible. Finding an interpreter for less commonly spoken languages can also be challenging, particularly in remote areas, and it may mean that assessments take more time to arrange. So this slide shows some commonly used acronyms from our referral form. So some of these may not be familiar to us, so can you imagine being a social worker in another country trying to decipher what these mean? The point is here just to be conscious and aware of how we communicate with our colleagues across borders, and just trying to avoid using acronyms and UK specific jargon. In the UK, we have 12 weeks to complete a kinship assessment, but overseas, timeframes can be affected by a number of factors. Cross-border assessments are often much more bureaucratic to arrange. Social workers in overseas agencies, they have their own caseloads. So a referral from the UK doesn't automatically take priority. That's why we work closely with our partners from the outset. We try to understand how they operate, what their availability is, so we can set really realistic timeframes. Political instability or safety concerns can also affect how quickly assessments can be completed. Travel is another consideration. Social workers may need to cover long distances in country, sometimes flying or driving, which naturally just extends the process. Local and religious holidays can further limit the availability for visas, for visits or for interviews. We therefore really encourage requests for assessments to be made as early as possible in the process, even pre-proceedings where possible. Working across borders also means navigating significant cultural differences, which really these can vary from country to country. These differences may influence parenting styles, social expectations, family structures, or even really everyday living arrangements. For example, in some cultures, it's common for a child to share a bed with their caregiver up into early adolescence, while in others, this would not be considered appropriate. Community factors can also play a significant role. Some prospective carers may be hesitant to provide references, for example, fearing that the local community will learn about their involvement of social services. And I guess we just need to consider that this does not necessarily reflect a lack of willingness to engage, but just it needs to be carefully navigated as part of the assessment. Adding to this complexity are the differences in social service systems from country to country. Not all countries will have a robust child protection framework or statutory supports for placements, and equally obtaining social service checks can be challenging or even not possible in some countries. And in these cases, local social workers are really invaluable. They know how to access relevant background information, and they have local understanding. They have got that local understanding of procedures for seeking information. And I think, you know, one of the key CFAB's key strengths lies in supporting, where we can, locally based social workers to reflect on these cultural differences and nuances within their assessments. You know, social workers should provide context within their reports where they can recognise those relevant differences, explaining how cultural practices may influence parenting behaviour and what impact they may have on meeting a child's needs and best interests, and considering whether carers can adapt if needed. I guess I want to just emphasise here the importance of culture and context within any assessment, but also to say that it's like a really difficult and complex area of practice. So I have a case study here that I'd like to present, and this exemplifies some of the key points that I've discussed today so far. And this case study is an amalgamation of two cases just to protect the identity of the child and others involved. And for confidentiality, the name of the child has been changed. I just want to say that this is a brief snapshot, but you know, along the way, there's always many challenges that present in the cases that we are managing. So I would like to tell you about David. David is 6 years old. He became subject to care proceedings due to concerns about his parents' substance misuse, exposure to domestic abuse, neglect, and his mother's mental health. David's uncle, who lives in an EU country, was put forward as a potential carer, and both David and his uncle are EU nationals. This meant there were no immigration issues, and David could potentially then be placed with his uncle in an EU country under a kinship arrangement. So this means we know what type of assessment we can request. We can request a kinship assessment. The local authority contacted CFAB and the Central Authority for advice on how to obtain assessment on the uncle. CFAB recommended that an assessment should be sought through the Central Authority under the 1996 Hague Convention. And we said this was important because the statutory agency for children's services in the placement country needs to complete their own assessment in order to grant Article 33 consent for the placement. The Central Authority for the 96 Hague Convention in this case, in reference to this specific country, confirmed the same. At the same time, CFAB also explained, we have a social worker in the placement country who can carry out a full kinship assessment alongside that statutory assessment sought by the Central Authority. And CFAB, we viewed that this might be required because the assessment report provided by the statutory agency may be quite brief. So in the end, 2 assessments ran in parallel. The statutory assessment carried out through the Central Authority involved 1 visit to the uncle's home. This assessment confirms the uncle's immigration status and considered his ability to care for David, included social service checks, and confirmed that the uncle had some family support around him. It also recommended his uncle could care for David, but the local authority viewed that the report was brief, being that it was just 4 pages long. The assessment completed by CFAB social worker was completed over 3 visits, and the report was 40 pages long and included appendices. It explored parenting capacity, home environment, contingency planning, and included references, bank statements, all the checks that you would generally require from an assessment, bank statements, medical checks, and police checks. The assessment from CFAB social worker highlighted 3 key areas that needed really further consideration. Firstly, as the uncle had sort of limited parenting experience, it was recommended that he receive some additional training in parenting strategies, and a local agency was identified by CFAB social worker to provide this additional support. Secondly, the home was overcrowded and the living arrangements had actually changed since the statutory agency's assessment. So changes were recommended to ensure David could be accommodated, and the uncle was able to make those changes. Thirdly, because David and his uncle had very limited contact over the years, it was recommended that contact take place in the UK, and that an additional assessment was done here in the UK to look at their relationship, look at how the uncle responds to him, and to seek David's views and wishes on his relationship with his uncle and living with him. And that addendum assessment was carried out by the local authority, and it concluded that David could be placed with his uncle. So after this, a transition plan was drawn up, a post-placement support plan was agreed. The local authority submitted a report to the Central Authority, sought Article 33 consent for placement, which was granted. And in this case, a child arrangements order was then made, placing David with his uncle. This order was automatically recognised in the EU country under the Hague 96 Convention, but the uncle also received additional legal advice to apply for a local order, as it's just much easier for him to manage David's care having a local order in the local language that was understood by services, easily understood by services in the EU country. Finally, post-placement visits were arranged. CFAB was able to arrange them once David was placed in his uncle's care in the placement country. So I hope this case study has been helpful just in highlighting some of the key points that I've made today. So we're now coming to the end of the presentation, but I just want to recap some of the key messages. First, it's just vital to establish a child's overseas family connections as early on as possible. Second, just make sure you clarify the child's nationality and immigration status at the outset, just because this can determine what type of assessment is needed, whether it's a kinship assessment or an adoption assessment. Thirdly, you need to clarify or you need to identify the requirements for consent to place in the placement country as early on as possible, and you may need an assessment completed by a local statutory social worker in country to ensure that placement is recognised and supported. This means you should be seeking cooperation with the foreign authorities as early on as possible. I also, would encourage you to consider how to seek an overseas assessment, whether through CFAB, the central authority, or embassy, but also considering whether more than one professional is required, and this can help ensure the process is legally compliant in 2 jurisdictions, and the assessment is culturally informed and robust. And finally, please do try to arrange overseas assessments as early on as possible. As we know, it can be complex to arrange across borders, and it can take time really to put everything needed into place. And here we have some useful resources, including CFAB's fact sheets and International Kinship Care Guides. We also have the contact details for the central authorities and the practical handbook for Hague 1996. I have also included a link here on how to find a lawyer overseas, as well as the FCDO's list of foreign embassies. So thank you all for joining us today. We're coming to the end of the Lunch and Learn session, but I'm happy to take any questions. Do we have any questions, Nadine? Oh, we do. I think you'll need to write your question in the chat. I don't know if I can see. Let me see the chat.
The question is, can NHS social workers use your service?
Yes. Well, if we're talking about assessment services, I don't see an NHS worker would usually contact us for that purpose, but an NHS worker can definitely contact our advice line. Any professional can contact our advice line for advice, and if there's any services that are appropriate that we could offer, we would definitely, if we can offer them, we will. It would be interesting to know what type of services you think you might find helpful or you might need from CFAB. Are there any other questions for us? Well, I'm putting here our feedback link. If you'd like to provide us with feedback, you'll also be sent this. Oh, I have another assessment.
The question is, can you provide more details on consent to place a child overseas or overseas child in the UK? So the question is around consent to place.
We have got a full fact sheet on consent to place, Article 33 consent. You can find it on our website, and we can include that in when we send out the slides. So I think that would be helpful to look over. And the training has been recorded today. I hope you found it valuable. Yeah, do please provide us with feedback. I also want to hear, learn more about what you would find useful in terms of, what more we can offer. So, any feedback will be greatly welcome. Yeah, and we'll hear our contact details. So if you've got more questions, you can call us on our advice line service as well. Okay. Oh, we've got some more. We've got a few more questions. We
the question, we sometimes deal with young people who have lost contact with one parent or relatives and may need to work with them. We also had a young person who was abused by her babysitter in Portugal. So it's just, I don't know if you want to respond with any possible services or.
So there's 2 different points in that question. One's around tracing of relatives. We can assist in some cases, and the central authority can potentially assist in some cases as well. It really depends on what information you have, what country it involves. So do please call us if you're trying to trace a parent for a child that you're working with. If you've got a case where you hear a child is being harmed abroad, the local we can assist with passing on child protection alerts. The local authority can make those referrals to us to share that information abroad. And in some cases, you can share that information through, or you can definitely share information of that nature through the central authority if it pertains to a named child, and you have those details.
There's also a question, Fiona, around whether or not we're able to help trace parents in the UK.
No, because we're unfortunately that's not our role currently. It's not something that we offer because we're more about doing cross-border casework. So in this case we wouldn't be assisting, but there are a lot of specialist agencies out there that do work on tracing and who may be able to help you. Okay, I'm going to bring it to an end. Thank you also for joining us today. I hope you found it valuable. Yeah, and please again do provide us with feedback. And thanks to Nadine for fielding those questions.
No problem at all.
Hope you all have a good afternoon. Cheers.
Thanks everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye.